Happy Wednesday, everybody. I just was reading a post on Twitter, I think it was. Yeah, Twitter, from a, I want to say a grief support, but it's not really support. It's a nationally known organization, I guess, that that says they help people to recover from guilt, from grief. And I beg to differ. I don't think you can actually fully recover from grief. I think grief is always with you, no matter what. That you will always, it's always there, like underneath that top layer, or maybe a few layers that you put on top of it. You can learn to cope with grief. You can learn to live with it. But to say you can recover from it, or to imply that you can be cured from grief, I don't buy it. I just don't buy it. All the research I've done, all the people I've spoken to, my own personal experiences, I really truly don't think you can fully recover from grief. After 11 years, there are still times when it surprises me, when I didn't expect it, but it came anyway. It shows up. Sometimes it's just a sadness. Sometimes it's tears. Sometimes it's a longing. Sometimes it just is. And and it surprises me every time it does. And it shouldn't, because I know you can't completely recover from grief. Um, okay, for an example, I was visiting my son and his wife and their new baby son, who they named after my husband. And it was it was a joyous time. And this child he's 10 months old at the time, and he was laughing and interacting, and he was just so much fun to be around. And I was sitting there watching him play with his dad, and I just got such a feeling of melancholy. Tears came to my eyes. I didn't let them flow. My son didn't know what was going on, I don't think. And it really surprised me, because not only was I sad that Dan wasn't there to see this, to meet his grandson, or had been there to meet his two granddaughters, but there was something about a grandson that just, especially, named after him. He didn't want any of his own sons named after him, but I think he would have felt honored to have his oldest son name his first son after him. I just think he would have felt very honored. I felt very honored. But my husband was so good with young children, not so much with babies, infants, but once they got to the point where they could interact and where they could smile and laugh, oh, it was his joy to make them laugh. And I knew that when I first met him and saw him with his own niece. She was about 2 at the time, and he was just so good with her, and he was so loving and had so much fun playing with her, that I knew he'd be a great father, and he was. Not so much when they got to teens, but that's a different story. Yeah, I think teen boys and fathers are not a match made in heaven usually, but in this case, it just it made me feel sad, but it also reminded me of how Dan would play with the boys or his niece or any child he came into contact with. How it just it just hit me out of the blue. I mean, this was like day 4 out of a week's long visit, and I'd seen my son playing with his son every day, pretty much all day since I had arrived. So I don't know why it was something about this one particular moment, but it hit me. It hit me a lot harder than I expected it to. I mean, I knew there would be some melancholy, but this was this was unexpected. And it also reinforced to me that you cannot recover from grief because you cannot anticipate all the possible times when you might um, experience grief. Sometimes it hits me in ways that have nothing to do with the death of my husband. I don't know if any of you have seen the Disney movie Encanto. I don't know if I'm even saying it right, but I started crying from at the beginning of the movie, and I pretty much cried all the way through the end. And I don't cry at movies. I don't cry, period, is in general. I'm not one of those people that tear up at Hallmark movie or Hallmark card commercials or things like that. I'm just not. I mean, I like sentimental things. I just don't tear up. I don't get that sentimental emotion. And Encanto hit it for me. I don't know why. Maybe because I identified with the little girl. She was trying to find her magic in a family of people who were magical. And she couldn't find her magic. And she didn't feel like she fit in, but she was happy. I mean, she was cheerful about the whole thing. So I don't know why I was sad, but I was. And I think it had been knowing that I could cry, knowing that I shouldn't hold them in. That I learned that from my grief journey. And the thing about the grief journey is there's no end. There may be a beginning, but there's no end. And I think we all have to come to terms with it. We have to stop curing what's not an illness. Grief is not an illness. Grief is natural. It's normal. It's not something we contract from others. It's not something that, we could just get an antibiotic from our doctors to cure. It's something that just lies within each of us who have lost someone we care about. It doesn't even have to be somebody you knew well, but if you cared about them, you're feeling grief. And anytime that person's name comes up, the Queen of England, her passing affected so many people. I was a guest on a podcast done that aired from England, and on how to whether it was normal or not to feel grief and to cry over the death of you know, their queen. And of course it was. It doesn't matter whether you met her before. It didn't even matter whether you liked her before. She was a figure in their lives. And it's perfectly normal. It's the end of an era. And it's perfectly normal to grieve that. And there will be times in the future when, say somebody is maybe 30-year-olds or 40-year-olds will, 10, 20, 30 years from now, for Americans of my generation, it was where were you when Kennedy was shot? Or where were you when the towers went down? What was your story? Well, I think a big part of Great Britain's population, it's going to be, where were you? How did you find out? What was your reaction to when the Queen died? It's not morbid. It's not sick and twisted. It's a feeling of shared, a feeling of common community, commonality. It's something that brings, no matter what kind of a life you have or what kind of a person you are, it is a way of uniting with other people who feel the same way. And to say that you can recover from grief is, to me, it seems a little narrow minded. I mean, does that mean that people who haven't gone through their process will never ever be happy again? No, no, it doesn't. You can be happy and still be grieving. You can be. My sons had me laughing the same day as my husband died. I mean, were we insensitive? No. Were we cold? No. Were we uncaring? Definitely not. It was the way we coped. And those laughters, those things that triggered the laughter, really helped me through it. And now looking back on those days, I don't necessarily remember. I can remember two horrible, horrible moments. Um, One was having to walk back into my house without him after he died, and the other was when he handed me the flag at his funeral. And then when I was expected to hand it back after they put him back into the hearse, I did not want to get that flag back. It had become my connection with him in that moment. Um, and at both of those times, I had wonderful people surrounding me. My my sons, um, my daughter-in-law, my sister-in-law, my brothers. You know, there's people that were surrounding me. They helped me through it, and I'll never forget their kindness. They may have forgotten about it, but I will never forget about it. Just as I will never forget that loss that I felt during those times. It wasn't that it's not that I hold on to the loss, but it's there underneath. It's like I can't think of. I'm not a science person, so I'm trying to think of a scientific thing, like how a volcano, the lava is always there underneath, even if it's not erupting. I guess if that's really a thing, that's how it is. You may never see or feel that lava, but it's there underneath, and it's flowing, and it informs us of how we've changed, how we're still changing. Yeah, I don't know. I've gone way off track on this, but I just want you to know that if you don't feel you've recovered from grief, don't worry about it. As long as you're not crying all day, every day, and it's been more than a few months or even a few years, you're fine. You're fine. Don't think that just because this one organization thinks that you need to be cured or recover from grief, there's something wrong with you if you don't feel that you have. Um, I I would be kind of interested in going through their program to find out what it's all about, but I think I wouldn't be there in a genuine way. I wouldn't be there for actual help. It'd be more like, um, I think I would feel like an undercover reporter or something, which might be the case a little bit, just to kind of see what they're doing. I did briefly think about taking the course to be a counselor for them, and it's very expensive. Let me tell you, it's very expensive. But I didn't agree enough with what they were teaching. The final result, that after like, I think it's like 6 to 8 weeks, that suddenly you're recovered from grief. Ain't gonna happen. I'm sorry. It's just wrong. I don't mean to sound like doom and gloom is yours for the rest of your life. That's not it. You're not walking with this rain cloud over you for the rest of your life. There's still plenty of sunshine to be had out there. It's just that every once in a while, that rain cloud will appear. It may not come pouring down, it may just be little sprinkles, or it may just be a dampness in the air, or sometimes it may be full blown, all out thunderstorm. That should happen less and less as time goes on, and as you learn how to cope with it. It's grief coping, maybe. That's, that's something worth teaching and worth learning. But to say that you can recover, I wonder how many people from taking that program and don't feel like they've recovered from it, feel like failures, feel like they're doing something wrong or something's wrong with them, that they haven't recovered, that they never have sad thoughts about their loved ones, that they can always move on and see, I don't even like that. Moving on implies that you're leaving something behind. When you move on to a new house, or when you move on from elementary school to middle school to high school, those are things you're leaving. Yeah, you're taking some of it with you, feelings and all, but you're basically leaving it behind. I prefer moving forward, which means, yeah, you're bringing that all with you, but you're still able to move. You're still able to function. You're still able to thrive in spite of this grief that wants to hold you back. And to think that, actually, that's not even true. We all think of grief as this evil monster that's out to take your soul, take over your soul, and just make you live horrible lives for the rest of your days. It's not that. I think we can learn from our grief. We grow from it. It's not something necessarily to be celebrated, not the grief itself, but what we've learned, the lessons we've learned, the growth we've achieved through that grief is something to be celebrated, is something to embrace. And my hope is that everybody that hears this will reach that time in their lives when they are feeling proud of who they've become, that they realize that they are not the same person they were before this horrible thing happened, but they might actually be a better version of themselves because of having gone through something so terribly painful. And yeah, while I'm not, I would give anything to have him here with me now, but I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. I wouldn't have the purpose in my life that I have now. I wouldn't feel so satisfied when somebody says, "Oh, I hadn't thought of that. Thank you." Or "I tried what you said and it worked." Or, "Yeah, I'm feeling better, but I just would like to keep working with you for a while longer." Anything, when somebody even, gives a like to one of my posts or one of my lives, that says something to me. It says that I'm in the right place, that I'm doing the right thing. And I know I wouldn't be doing that if he was still here. So I know his sister, his oldest sister, and we firmly believed that something good was going to come from his illness and his death. Whether it was the doctors who took care of him learned something about, it wasn't just cancer that got him, it was a side effect of the cancer, not of the treatment, but of the cancer. And so, maybe they learned something more about how to treat that in the future. Maybe they learned more about their patients as people. Maybe the nurses, took something away from their time spent with him. Even if it's just one little pebble creates ripples, right? The ripple effect or the butterfly effect, I guess. Um, but I never thought it would be this. I never thought that I would be um, kind of an activist in my own tiny little way. Um, yeah, I never thought that this would be me. Never. I mean, especially while he was still alive. Would I ever think about doing anything with widows and widowers? No. No. I mean, what did I know about that? I didn't know anything. I mean, I knew my mother was a widow, but, we never really talked about the grief part of it. Um, my mother-in-law, she was a widow, but she and I didn't talk about that either. And people don't, especially after the first few horrible days. The first week and everybody expects life to kind of get back to normal. Well, it may for people who weren't married to him or her, but for the spouse, for their loved ones, for his sons and daughters, sisters and brothers, life doesn't go back to normal. Especially if this was a person you interacted with on a daily basis. Your whole day is going to take on a different tone than it did before. Anyway, I'm going on and on and on, and I'm sorry about that. I just want to let you know my feelings on recovering from grief. I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's even something we should really want because it has changed us and it will continue to change us. Some ways for the better. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you for listening. And please comment or send me messages. Let me know your thoughts on this. Maybe you disagree with me. Maybe, and I'd love to know why. Have you recovered? Do you feel that you have fully recovered from grief? That you're cured from grief? That makes it sound like it's an illness and it really annoys me. But there are people who you should be. You should be all better now. Anyway, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. If you don't want to post them publicly, send me a message, through Facebook or, Facebook Messenger is probably the fastest and easiest way to get in touch with me. You can also contact me at, if I can find it, I don't have it. Cindy at cindyjburns.com. Okay. For email, it would just replace that www with Cindy at cindyjburns.com. Okay? And I thank you for putting up with me today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.